So imagine with me that you're a paratrooper on the eve of Operation Overlord. You and 30 of your best friends are about to jump out into the night sky. Chances are you're going to be scattered in the wind. There's only one problem. It's in the 1940s. You don't have a handheld radio or a cell phone or any way to communicate with each other in the dark. So they had to come up with an SOP. And the answer to that was this simple device. Use this device. If you hear anything at night, you give it a click. If you hear a click back in response, then you assume it's one of your guys and you deconflict using code words. If you don't hear a click, then you assume the worst and potentially open fire. Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Adam from Spirit Systems, and on today's Patrol Basics video, we're going to be talking about low-tech signaling.
The bombing and crippling of roads, bridges, waterways, railheads, the isolation of a battlefield. And the battlefield is isolated. No German reserves.
So low-tech signaling. This is a video that we have wanted to make for quite a while, to be honest, and I think it's a video that's very important to our armed forces community and our civilian communities alike. Low-tech signaling is going to become more and more of a necessity as technology gets better. And I think a lot of people out there see that in the opposite way. They see ATAC and man-A radios and mesh networks as this tool that they're going to use to overcome the problem of communication. I see it going the other way. I think that we need simple tools for communication when those other systems are not working. And I see it as a building block where you start with baseline communications, low-tech options, and then you add on these other technology groups that help you communicate. Low-tech signaling to me is anything that you can use to signal that does not require any power source, so batteries or solar panels or something like that. Fuel, it doesn't require any of those, so that makes it low-tech, right? It makes it something that you can develop and implement pretty quickly and cheaply at the unit level. You can use your imagination and creativity to create systems and SOPs that are specific to your situation and your element. From the security aspect, you can develop a new form of signaling that no one has ever seen or used. That is a very big advantage for you on the battlefield if no one has ever seen it and they don't know how to react to it and they don't know how to interpret what you're signaling. All of these options that we have laid out in front of us, which are just a few options, at some point, somebody just had an idea, right? Somebody had an idea that they were going to use something to signal with, or they had a need. They developed it, and now now it's proliferated. Now we use them a lot. But these are certainly not the only ways that you can signal. Another thing I want to say is that we don't want to expose any SOPs or TTPs on this video that are still being used or that can't be easily accessed through open channel information networks that exist today. So if you don't see something up here that you're using in your unit, it's probably not because we forgot, it's just because we don't want to give that information out. And the information we're going to provide is enough information to get you started and just kind of give you a baseline of tools that you can use that are readily available and get those creative juices flowing. Before we actually start digging into each tool individually, I will say that through observation, through my time in the military or even civilian time, just watching units train, places like JRTC, NTC, or Darcy or whatever, the units that can come in and perform their task without using any electronic communications devices tend to be the units that perform the best overall. And I think that's because when you can use something, very rudimentary and there's not a lot of communication that's, needed, then when you have those communication stacks layered up above it, when you have access to those tools, they just help you complete the job. But you already know how to do it without them. So your baseline is very strong at the lowest level. That means that lower level soldiers, team members, they know what they have to do because you can't, nanny them into the objective and make them do all the things you want by talking to them on a radio. They just have to know it organically. So keep that in mind when you're watching this video. If your unit is not training in these techniques, if you're not implementing them in the field in some capacity, then you're behind the power curve. The battlefield of today and the battlefield of tomorrow is going to require that you take responsibility and start implementing low technology solutions for communication. So the first thing I want to talk about is panels. And this big orange guy here is a panel, a VS-17 panel. This is a military issued piece of equipment. You've probably seen it if you've been in the military, and you might have seen it even if you're not. A very simple tool. It's essentially a nylon piece of cloth that has 2 color variations on it. The military issued ones will generally be fluorescent orange on one side and a pink fluorescent on the other side. The reason why there's 2 colors is you can fold the panel and show, half pink, half orange, and you can use that to create messages. This panel was developed for communicating with aircraft, and it is very large. I'm going to open this one up just to show you really how big the, out of the box panel is. So you can see very large, very, very long, very large. I think it's a little unnecessary for every individual soldier to have something that big, right? The cool thing about a VS-17 panel is that they are very cheap. So you can buy one of these from a surplus store for like $20 or something, and you can cut it apart into smaller sections, which is what I like to do. So you can see this guy here. He's a little bit smaller in size because I just cut him down. Right? So this is something that I would carry personally. And, maybe each squad leader or team leader has something this size. And then you have one in the whole platoon that is that large if you need to signal aircraft or something like that. I even cut them down smaller than that, and I'll keep those stored inside my uniform. I'll have a really small piece, maybe about that big, just stuffed in a pocket. That way I can, if I have to drop all my kit, I still have a way to use that panel. The theory behind the panel really is simple. It's a contrasting high-vis color that is not readily available in an urban or out in the countryside. It is not available. You're not going to see a fluorescent orange animal running by or a plant or something usually. So something that's very contrasted, and you simply present it, and then the other party sees it, and then that's how you use it to communicate. There is a technical manual that the Army has developed to show you exactly how to use this panel. If I can remember it, we'll post it in the description of the video so you can check it out. But you can Google it as well, VS-17 panel, and you can find that TM. It'll teach you how to fold it and which ways mean which things to really speak a language with this panel to other aircraft. Some other ways that I like to use the panel is, you can cut a piece of it off, very thin strips, and you can use those. You can to hang over doors to show that a room is clear, right? If you're doing a big clearing operation through a neighborhood, you could hang it over the door to show that house is clear, or you could staple it to the outside of the house, show that the house is clear. You could use it on cars, drape that piece over the car door, and that would help, clearing operations. When people come through behind you, they would know, hey, somebody's been through here. They marked it, via the SOP. So you can carry a lot of these. They're lightweight. Those strips are easy to make. Again, for $20, you could supply a whole squad with thin strips to use. I also like to use it for stay behind stuff, right? If you're thinking of more of the civilian application, carrying one of these and a Sharpie, I can cut a piece off and I can draw an arrow on it, and I can, put some rocks on it and leave it to tell rescuers, hey, I've departed and I'm going this way. Or if I want to leave a note behind for them, I can mark it with this really fluorescent piece that, a search party is going to be able to find a lot easier. So definitely great for just, anytime you want to get somebody's attention, that bright, fluorescent orange is going to do the job. Very rudimentary, very simple. The colors do not have to be orange and pink. You can come up with your own variation. You can have these made. You could, there's all sorts of things you can do. This is just the standard issue one, and they're very available. Like I said, you can buy them from any surplus store out there and just get going with it. There's some variations out on the market that I think are worth mentioning because I actually prefer them now to the issued version. The issued version is kind of a thicker nylon, and as you can see, it's very bulky, it's very big, and it's actually pretty heavy for what it is. And you're carrying this thing around, right? But a company called Battle Systems makes a much lighter weight version. So you can see this guy right here, much lighter, different dimensions. He makes different sizes. He makes different pattern variations, all sorts of different things, but very, very lightweight. And you can see I can just crumple this thing up and jam it inside of a pocket, and it's so easy to use, easy to deploy. It has tie-down loops on all the corners, so you can still tie it down and all of that. Works very well. Again, a pink side, an orange side. Like I said, he makes it in different size variations, so this one is much larger than the one I just showed you. So, you can make them larger. And he makes one that is actually smaller than, more of an individual one than the one I showed you too. So, again, battle systems, you can order them from him. He can service your unit or whatever and get those done. Something special we wanted to pull out is this was something interesting that we were given from the Marine Corps. Comes in a pouch. I don't really understand why it's in a pouch, but it is. And if you're a Marine and you get issued this and you understand why this is the way it is, leave us a comment, because we want to know why the Marine Corps is using and issuing this particular panel. But as you can see, the panel is orange on one side, and then it is coyote brown on the other side. It's just an interesting configuration. My guess is that it's coyote on one side so that you can fold it up and then there's no bright color showing anymore, which, to be fair, is a good idea, because if you're carrying this around, no matter how you fold it, it's a bright color, so you have to conceal it inside of something else. So I don't know. You tell us. If you're a Marine, tell us in the comments. But this, again, is another variation and can still be used. You can still fold it to make a pattern so that somebody, could interpret that or whatever. A good anecdotal use case, in Iraq on Humvees, that, you'd have a shade on the turret, and you would have, a VS-17 panel draped over it so that while you're moving down an MSR, aircraft flying around could easily identify where a convoy was, a U.S. convoy, or where individual vehicles were in that convoy. Remember, though, whenever we're using signal panels, if you can see it, if your adjacent unit can see it, so can any observer that's out there. They can see it as well. So you always have to remember that when we're signaling, we use it and then we tuck it away. The last thing I'll say about panels is kind of a big one because they're simple and they're readily available. You can also look up, there's a lot of documentation on using flags, different colored flags, which is the same thing as a VS-17 panel. It's just a flag. There's people who've done a lot of the legwork for you. Anybody was in the Navy on a ship understands that ships still use flags and, Morse code and things like that. So you can use that flag kind of signaling pattern as well with different colors. This is another piece of VS-17 panel that essentially we have cut down into a taper, and then we've sewn and hemmed the edge, right? And then on the end here, we've put lead fishing weights into a pouch and sewn it shut. So this is called, sometimes I've heard it called a flaming rock or a flying squirrel or whatever, it doesn't matter. But there's some companies that make these, that prefab them, or you can just buy a VS-17 panel, take them to the sew shop outside of your post, so Bradley's or Ranger Joe's or whatever, and you can have them just sew you up some of these. One VS-17 panel, you might make 20 of these guys or something. I recommend having one that has weights already inside of it that you roll up and you keep in your kit or whatever, and then have a couple more that just have a pouch that you can stuff rocks or whatever into and make them in an expedient manner. But I advocate for having one that's pre-built, because when you need this to signal, you're not necessarily going to have access to something heavy to put inside of it, so you can throw it. And how this works essentially is you just throw it. You just throw it in the air, and then this streamer flaps around and people can observe it, right? And some anecdotal examples of how that would be used is if you're having somebody like a support by fire element shift fire, or you want to tell somebody you're coming out of a structure, you could use something like this to signal that. Say, hey, they see this orange streamer and they already know that means that you're going to be maneuvering, so they're going to shift fire or whatever. But a very useful tool, very low tech again. Just remember, again, anyone can see that you're throwing this. The meaning behind you throwing it is what matters. So developing your own SOPs and having those clearly delineated out is more important than the signaling method itself. So moving on, the next thing I'm going to talk about is kind of it's an oddity, and I haven't seen it used very much, but they used to be very common for hunters, and those are hunters' tacks. Tacks like the, thumbtack, same thing. The difference being that these have a reflective coating on the flat end of the tack. So the idea is that as you walk out into the forest, you would push these tacks into trees as you're going out. That way, if you turn around, you can, shine a light, in low light, or you can just see the tacks in the daytime, and you can find your path back to wherever you came from. I wouldn't really use them like that in the military, but I would use them for marking cache sites, marking link-up sites, or if you're in an urban area, you could use them for marking large venues like hospitals, or if you're inside of a hotel, clearing that out. As a law enforcement officer or something, you can just simply push these into the drywall. Very low signature, very cheap. They don't have a shelf life. They can just sit in your gear, but you can carry a ton of them. So one of the big problems with clearing large structures is that how do we mark every single room? Well, this is a good alternative if you have a lower budget. You can't afford to have 1,000 chem lights already ready to go. And they're actually faster because you don't have to unpackage all the chem lights and stuff like that. So for a large venue, it's a good option if you're going to have to mark every single room on there. But yeah, thumbtacks, they're easy. Again, these are reflective. So, nighttime for a civilian, if you just shine a flashlight, you're going to hit that reflectiveness and it's going to show you a literal trail through wherever you came. If you're in the military, still can be used. Probably not going to shine a white light on it, but if you hit it with IR light, it will reflect as well. So they work in daytime or nighttime. The next thing I'm going to talk about is everybody's favorite, the chem light. So I get asked probably more questions about chem lights than anything else. And I see everyone on the internet wearing chem lights on their belt or whatever, running around, shooting things in the desert, right? And I think a lot of people have it because they've seen it in a picture, and so they just have them on their kit, and they don't really understand why they have them on their kit. But honestly, it's not a big secret. They're just used for marking things. It doesn't matter what the SOP is, they're just used for marking. So chem lights obviously work best in a low light or interior urban environment. So if you're in the middle of the desert in the daytime and you pop a green chem light and throw it down, really no one's going to be able to use that for, at any kind of distance. But inside of a room or inside of a building, they work great. And it's a preferred method because they are very visual, very deliberate. And in the global war on terror, they weren't really available to our adversary. So it's not like he's going to have chem lights he's throwing out as well. So chem lights come in a ton of colors, which is also convenient for signaling because you can have SOPs with chem lights for, hey, this color is for a casualty, this color is for a cleared item, this color is for a UXO. You can have all these different colors and you can use them accordingly. So very, very useful tool if you can afford them. I recommend stockpiling them if you do create an SOP because you're going to burn through them pretty quicker than you think you will. So have a bunch on hand. Another thing to note is that they come in a package like this. The minute you take them out of the package, they start degrading. They don't like sunlight, so they kind of start losing their effectiveness. So you got to keep them packaged or in a very dark container, or else they're going to lose their effectiveness. So don't open all 1,000 chem lights you just purchased and then leave them outside, or else, in a month or two, they'll start to lose their, both their brightness and their burn time will run out. So another problem with them is that because they're low tech, they illuminate, but they only illuminate for a certain amount of time. Sometimes it's 4 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours. Just depends. It'll tell you on the package. So chem lights are pretty good. Another method we use with chem lights is called buzz sawing. Basically, you tie a lanyard to your chem light. So you have this guy. And then you can use however long it is. Essentially, you can spin the chem light around, and it will create a much larger shape than the chem light alone could. So as you're spinning it at night, then it's going to create a big circle and it can be seen much further away. So buzz sawing is a very a very good technique, very low tech, very cheap. Just take some type 3 nylon or something, and then you can signal at very, very long distance in low light. So again, chem lights are more of a low light solution, or something, interior, where you don't have the sunlight to block out the chem light itself. This little guy, something that I think it's too easy to carry. It's useful for other things besides signaling. I mean, you can literally just look at yourself in the mirror, but this is a very small signal mirror. And these were used by aviators or people on like a maritime operation to be able to signal aircraft or other vessels. Essentially, the theory is that the sun's out, you look through the center of the mirror, there's a peephole, and then you use this to frame the sun, and then you reflect the light into the eyes of the pilot, or into the captain or whoever is watching on the other vessel, and that way you get their attention, right? So if they're out there looking for you, then you would use this to say, hey, I'm over here, and this can be seen from miles and miles away. Very powerful tool. You can use it for signaling too. Again, this can be part of your SOP. You can have an OP that communicates with another OP by just hitting them with a signal flash on there. Again, it is too easy to just carry this with you. And for me, I use it more as just a mirror to like, hey, you have a toothache or something, you need to check your own face. I use it more for that, so I have it anyways, but it is a good tool for that. Lastly, because it is light, it can be used over great distance for Morse code transmission, right? And we're going to talk about code and stuff in a second, and it is very good for that. So if you can get a positive connection with somebody else, you can simply use your hand to pass over the light, to pause the light beam that is hitting them, to send Morse code. Morse code is definitely underrated and can be used with any light source. Right here we have a roll of glow tape. So glow tape is something that was used quite effectively before the proliferation of night vision. So, before every single guy in the Army had a set of nods, we still had to go out at night. We still had to do operations. We still had to find our way and track the guy in front of us. So what we would do is we would take glow tape, and this is a modern helmet, so not quite the same, but we would have a camouflage retainer band so we could put foliage and helmet covers and stuff on our helmets, and we would sew on a little bit of glow tape onto the back, 2 little pieces, we called them cat eyes. That way, at night, I could follow the man in front of me. I could basically just look at the back of his helmet, and it would just barely be glowing, and as my eyes adjusted, I would be able to see it better, and then, just follow behind him. But if you're looking at him from the front, you wouldn't see the cat eyes. We would also use it on our rucksacks so that different units could be identified, and you could make sure that you were in the right assembly area when you were doing an operation. So one unit might have 3 triangles, and the next has a square, and another one has a circle, and that would just be the way that we would be able to, rectify any personnel issues, get them in the right spot, and then again, when you're marching, you would be able to see that symbol on there. It can also be used to mark things in a interior space in an urban environment. So again, it's just tape. This is a Gaffers tape, which is a cloth tape, so it's a little more malleable. It doesn't leave a lot of residue, and it's a high quality tape. Glow tape comes in a lot of different formats. I prefer the Gaffers tape, but again, I can write on this with a Sharpie. I could stick it somewhere and write on it. I could actually read that writing in the dark because it is glowing behind it. So you could use this to mark things in interiors, or mark critical equipment that you might need to grab or something like that. So I highly recommend the glow tape. Again, very low tech, no batteries, easy to use. This guy right here, lots of controversy around pyrotechnics in our country. This is a Mil-X high output smoke. I bought these, I don't even know, from a website a couple years ago. I don't know if you can still buy them. I didn't do my research on that before the video, which I should have, but it's essentially a smoke grenade. It's harmless. You pull the pin, you throw it, it billows smoke for 60 seconds or so. Very, very useful for communicating information over a large area or to a lot of people instantaneously. They come in colors. On the military side, you should know what the colors mean for your unit, right? You may not always get the colors you want either, so you may have to switch the SOP on the fly. For civilians, Again, I'm not sure if you can even get these anymore, but if you can, I recommend picking some up, whether or not it's this variation or some of the other variations where you might have to use some kind of ignition system like a lighter to actually light a fuse and then throw it. But you should have some way of signaling with smoke. Again, it's one of the only ways to signal to somebody who's very far away of what's going on, right? It's also a great way to get a hold of aircrafts or search parties. So that, again, if you're somebody who's an avid outdoorsman, it's not a bad idea just to have it. That way, if you do see a aircraft flying over and they cannot see you, you could throw this out. It's gonna be very distinctive, get their attention, and draw them to you. A note about colors. So whenever we flash a panel or we use a smoke grenade or something like that, we're expecting another element to observe it. If that element observes it and they tell us, hey, I see smoke, then you should ask them what color of smoke that they see, right? Because there's a lot of deception going on the battlefield, and if if the color is blue and they say red, then there's deception going on. Or if they see a different color than you tell them, they're going to think maybe they're going into a trap. Say it's a helicopter landing and they tell you that they see, or they tell you the smoke is blue and you're like, hey, I threw a red smoke. It's a problem. You have to assume that the enemy is listening. Again, we're not dominating the communication space anymore. So we have to assume they're listening, and if they're listening, they know you're throwing smoke. They might try to bait that element into them by throwing smoke as well. So revealing the color should not be the first thing that you do. Another thing, it's more on the military side, but you can get, interestingly enough, you can get flares. We're talking about flares that you shoot into the sky. You can get actually shotgun shells that are flares as well, which I find very interesting. Requires you to have a shotgun, but it is a signaling tool. The military has access to pen flares. So this is a very simple device that you basically load a flare onto it. It was, again, developed and used by aviators, but ground forces have used them a lot too. And you basically pull this and then you release it and it fires a flare into the air. Very small form factor, very simple to use and very effective at signaling, again, when we have phases of an operation where we cannot hear each other, we cannot talk to each other because of the gunfire that's going on around us or the distance that we have to cover. So the flares are a great tool for that. Again, this is more on the higher technical end of the spectrum of stuff we're talking about, but it still does not require any batteries. So you leave this thing in a sealed package, it's going to last as long as it needs to last. So you're going to have access to those flares. Again, very easy to use and can be seen over a great distance. Going to work better at night, obviously, but these are very visible in the daytime as well. So again, if you need a machine gun team to shift fire or an element to start maneuvering, you fire the flare of whatever color, and they understand, hey, a red flare means I need to do this, so they start initiating that action. Flares are a very useful tool. I wish they were more easily available to everyone. So those are kind of our visual tools, right? We've been through panels, but we've been through Tacks, we've been through chem lights, smoke, flares, mirrors. That's all stuff we use so that, like, things that we can see, right? And something I always found very interesting about the Army is that we would go and we would train for our primary mission in the infantry, which is literally closing with the enemy and fighting them, right? That's what you do. And we would do these train ups where we would do these dry runs, and you would go forward and your team leader would say set, and then the other adjacent element would say moving, and then you would do that, and then you'd go to do a live fire and no one can hear anymore. So there's no way to talk to each other because we're assuming our radios are not working, right? So guys are on the battlefield and you're like looking, which you can do, right? We can just look at each other's body language. That in and of itself is a signal. And so you start getting a flow going. But I always found it odd that in an environment where I cannot hear because there is so much gunfire going on and the distance is getting bigger and bigger as we get more and more dispersed, that we didn't utilize some kind of signaling technique. And that's really where the next device kind of started to come in handy. As we developed our SOPs, we started using whistles. It's very, very basic, but it's something that every single team leader, squad leader, platoon leader should have on their equipment, just tethered to their equipment where they can access it very quickly. And then you should train on what whistle blasts mean. 2 whistle blasts, 1 long whistle blast, repeated short whistle blasts, whatever it is. You use this to signal the other unit of what your intentions are. This is a very powerful tool, and any team leader who is doing live fire lanes, you should start implementing this low-tech signaling technique into your SOP because it really is a lifesaver. Whistles are great too for rescue, right? Part of the issue of being rescued is that if nobody knows exactly where you are, they're playing the Marco Polo game if you have a whistle. So they yell and you can't yell, you blow in the whistle, amplifies very loud, and now they can start honing in on your location. So again, whistles, we're now using our ears as the sensory source instead of the visual cues from the other ones. And then as in the beginning of the video, we have the clicker. Right, used by dog trainers now, but infantrymen of the past. These brass clickers can be had for pretty cheap, a couple bucks a piece. They're very loud. I just love clicking it. It's actually very annoying. If you get one of these, your wife is going to hate you in exactly 1 click. They're going to ask you to stop, but they work very well. And I think that again, every team leader at least the team leader should have one, but if not, every man in my element would have this clicker on them. It is still a great way to communicate in low light, and it is a really good way to communicate when performing some kind of link up, right? Like coming back, into a patrol base and you're hiding because you don't want the sentry to shoot you, and you give them a click and then they click back. Can be used in a bunch of different ways. Like I said, dog trainers use them to train dogs or whatever, but it's a good tool and something that you should consider. So these are all tools that we could use, but we are also a tool. So I want to talk about hand and arm signals for a second. A couple of the units that I have seen working recently have had a really hard time patrolling around without using their radios. Hand and arm signals are very critical, and knowing what hand and arm signals should be in your element and what they mean, and then also when to give them, is something that you need to make sure every individual is on the same page with. Giving a hand and arm signal is not only important, but it's necessary for an element to move around with the least amount of signature, right? So we're not talking with our mouths, we're not showing each other any kind of light, and we're also not transmitting on our devices. Again, if you train to do the operation only using these low-tech, signaling tools, you won't be sad when you don't have the high-tech signaling tool when you're out on patrol. So you need to have hand and arm signals that tell people what I'm going to do, what my intentions are, or what I see. You need to be able to identify different things like people. There's a very good scene in Saving Private Ryan where the sniper is communicating information about enemy units that are approaching down to the guys on the ground. That is a realistic scene, in my opinion, where you have a lot of coded language that you can transfer to somebody else very rapidly, just using your hands, almost like sign language, to tell them, like, hey, there's this many infantrymen, there's this many tanks coming our way, or whatever, how long it might take for them to get there. You should be able to transmit all that information without talking or having to write it down or anything like that, just by using those hand and arm signals. We're not going to go over all the hand and arm signals. Again, Ranger Handbook teaches you some of them. I really do think it's important that if you're in the military, in the Army, you're going to have to be on the same page with what the Army uses, but there's no reason why you can't go deeper with your element and have more hand and arm signals to make yourselves more effective. Generally, what the Army teaches you in a manual, that is just the basic stuff, right? It's just the basis of the information. You should go a little bit deeper. Codes and runners. That's kind of the last thing I want to talk about in this video. Very important, and something that has been completely eliminated and lost from our collective knowledge in the military. So using codes used to be the standard. We used to assume that all of our messages were being intercepted and exploited, even though they're encrypted. And I think that it's important that you assume that. If you are a communicator, you should be assuming that you're being listened to. So even when you're talking over an encrypted network, everything you say means nothing to whoever's listening because you're using some kind of coded language, right? Abbreviated language, code words, things that are just benign to anyone else. And then you're switching those every so often so that somebody can't establish a real pattern to understand what you're saying. You can also use written code, ciphers, things like that. Again, if I'm sending a message with a runner, I'm going to want to use some kind of cipher so that information, if he gets intercepted, is not just open in the air now. They still have to take the time to decipher that information. So runners are a great tool because you have an individual who doesn't rely on anything else but his legs and his wits. He can take information, he can carry it for you, or you can just speak information to him, and then he can carry that information and give it to another unit. Again, it doesn't require any communication lines. It doesn't require any equipment. It just requires that person. If you are in the military, I just really can't stress this enough. Please sit down with your guys, establish these techniques, and start implementing them as soon as you can, because the time to figure it out is not when you're in a trench in Ukraine. The time is now. Figure it out now. It's very, very cheap. Establish it, start training with it, and then, things will go easy when you go to do your actual certification. You have radios and GPS and ATAC. All of that will be easy to do once you've done it kind of this low-tech way. As always, guys, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. But more so, for me personally, please comment down below with future ideas, things you want to see. This was one of those things that somebody asked for. It was a pleasure to shoot this video and give some of this information away. If you have ideas, tell us. Who knows, it might be the next video. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.